Welcome to today's episode of the World War Archive by Skoob, and I am your host, Jim Beaver. Picture this. It's 1941, and Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. U-boats are hunting in wolf packs across the Atlantic, sending hundreds of thousands of tons of Allied shipping to the ocean floor every month. The British are starving, their supply lines bleeding out in the freezing waters. Churchill himself would later say that the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war was the U-boat peril. Now imagine that in a Victorian mansion in the English countryside, a scruffy, eccentric mathematician who cycles to work wearing a gas mask to combat hay fever is about to change the course of human history. This is the story of Alan Turing and the breaking of Enigma, one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the 20th century, and a secret so closely guarded that even Turing's own mother had no idea what her son was really doing. Let's rewind to 1938. Alan Turing is in Princeton, New Jersey, carrying out fundamental research on mathematical intuition, the kind of pure, abstract work that seems about as far from warfare as you can get. But Turing has developed a hobby during his American sojourn, cryptography, the art of encoding and decoding messages. He finds it a pleasant diversion from serious mathematics, even inventing his own secret codes for fun. In a letter from this period, he writes about one of his codes. One of them is pretty well impossible to decode without the key and very quick to encode. I expect I could sell them to HM government for quite a substantial sum, but I'm rather doubtful about the morality of such things. The irony is delicious. Within a year, he wouldn't be selling codes to the government. They'd be desperately enlisting him to break the enemies. By this point, Turing had already established himself as one of the most brilliant minds of his generation. At just 23 years old, he'd become a Cambridge professor. His work on intelligent machines was years ahead of its time. This was a man who, in 1936, had essentially laid the theoretical foundation for all modern computing with his concept of the Turing machine, a simple but profound model showing that computation itself could be reduced to a basic mechanism of reading, writing, and moving along a tape of symbols. But Turing wasn't your typical Cambridge don. During his happy years at King's College in the 1930s, he lived the life of an archetypal academic, mixing pure mathematics with more trivial pursuits. In 1938, he made a point of seeing Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and became obsessed with the scene where the Wicked Witch poisons an apple. His colleagues heard him continually repeating the macabre chant, "Dip the apple in the brew, let the sleeping death seep through." Cambridge provided Turing with something else crucial, a tolerant and supportive environment. Homosexuality was largely accepted within the university, allowing him to engage in relationships without the constant fear of exposure that plagued gay men in the broader society of the 1930s Britain. He had no serious long-term relationships, but he seemed content with his life of intellectual pursuit and personal freedom. Then, everything changed. September 4th, 1939, the day after Britain declared war on Germany, Alan Turing's academic career came to an abrupt halt. The government code and cipher school summoned him to become a cryptanalyst at a place that would become known as Station X, Bletchley Park. Turing moved from the opulence of Cambridge's quadrangles to the Crown Inn at Shenley Brook End, cycling 5 kilometers each day to work. One of the original codebreakers described the atmosphere on that first day as rather prim and rather like the first day at an English public school. The recruitment was extraordinary. About 30 people initially. Archaeologists, linguists, chess champions, crossword enthusiasts, and only 2 mathematicians. This suggests the British authorities still saw code-breaking as more of a literary than a mathematical problem. They were about to learn otherwise. The mansion at Bletchley Park was an atypical establishment where military discipline had to adapt to very peculiar recruits. As one historian noted, the sorts of people employed there, homosexuals, Jews, anarchists, freethinkers, could never have thrived in a rigid German military organization. Their talents combined in what someone called this unholy, ungoverned, brilliant crucible of code-breaking. Even in this small world of cryptologists, Turing stood out. He despised social norms, preferring to sift everything through rationality. His colleague Peter Hilton later said, Alan Turing was obviously a genius, but he was an approachable, friendly genius. He was always willing to take time and trouble to explain his ideas, but he was no narrow specialist, so that his versatile thought ranged over a vast area of the exact sciences. But Turing's brilliance came packaged with profound eccentricity. He didn't like wearing ties and always looked untidy. He was painfully shy around women. One female colleague recalled offering him a cup of tea, and he shrank back as if he was going to be shot. He walked to the canteen in a curious, sideways motion with his head down. He rarely bothered to shave, his nails were stuffed with dirt, and his clothes were a mass of creases. One veteran of Bletchley, Jack Good, later commented, "Fortunately, the authorities did not know that Turing was a homosexual. Otherwise, we might have lost the war." So what exactly was Turing up against? Every day, operators in interception stations transcribed hundreds of German messages, unreadable scrambles of letters that piled up on the cryptologists' desks with little result. The Germans were using a machine called Enigma to encrypt their communications, and it was devilishly clever. Here's the challenge. The English cryptologists actually had two exact replicas of the Enigma machine, handed over by the Polish just weeks before their country was invaded. But having the machines wasn't much help. Enigma was designed to remain secure even if captured by the enemy. Think about that for a moment. The Germans were so confident in their encryption that they assumed even if you had the machine in front of you, you still couldn't read their messages. With any code-generating machine, there are two separate tasks. First, if you don't know how it works, you need to figure out the engineering, how many wheels it has, how they operate together. You need to break the machine, as they say. Second, you need to devise methods that will enable you to read the daily messages. And that second part? That was the truly hard part. That was where brilliance and ingenuity were desperately needed. While old-school codebreakers used graph paper and pencil sharpeners, Turing was convinced that most reasoning produced by the human mind could be mechanized. What if, he wondered, you needed a machine to fight a machine? This was revolutionary thinking. Remember, this was 1939. The modern computer didn't exist yet. But Turing, who had already theorized the fundamental principles of computation, understood something his colleagues didn't, that a sufficiently sophisticated machine could automate the logical processes needed to crack Enigma. Turing spent part of his time in the huts contributing to routine code breaking, and part in what they called the think tank, formerly Sir Herbert Leon's Apple, Pear, and Plum store. This was where cryptanalysts brainstormed through new problems or anticipated future challenges. Turing focused on what would happen when the Germans inevitably tightened their security. Bletchley's early successes had relied on Polish mathematician Marian Rejewski's work, which exploited a crucial flaw. Enigma operators encrypted each message key twice. If the message key was YGB, they'd encipher YGB, YGB. This repetition was meant to prevent errors, but it created a vulnerability in Enigma's security. Turing correctly predicted the Germans would eventually notice this weakness and abandon the repetition, which would confound all of Bletchley's current techniques. He needed to find an alternative attack, one that didn't rely on the repeated message key, and he found it in something he called cribs. Here's how it worked. As weeks passed, Bletchley accumulated a vast library of decrypted messages. Turing noticed many conformed to rigid structures. By studying old decrypted messages, he realized he could sometimes predict part of an undeciphered message's contents based on when it was sent and its source. For example, the Germans sent a regular encrypted weather report shortly after 6 a.m. each day. An encrypted message intercepted at 6:05 a.m. would almost certainly contain Wetter, the German word for weather. The rigorous protocol of military organizations meant such messages were highly regimented in style. Turing could even be confident about where Wetter appeared in the encrypted message. When you could associate a piece of plain text with a piece of ciphertext, this combination became known as a crib. This was elegant, pure Turing. He'd found a way to exploit the Germans' own bureaucratic predictability against them, but having a crib was just the beginning. You still needed to test it against every possible Enigma setting, and there were astronomical numbers of possibilities. This is where Turing's machine would come in. In 1939, Turing designed an electromechanical device called the Bombe. The name came from an earlier Polish machine, but Turing's was far more sophisticated. The bombe would use cribs to check scrambler settings and reveal keys, automating the logical deductions that would take humans impossibly long to perform manually. The first prototype, christened Victory, arrived at Bletchley on March 14, 1940. It was put into operation immediately, but initial results disappointed everyone. The machine was much slower than expected, taking up to a week to find a particular key. A modified design was submitted, but it would take 4 more months to build. Then, disaster struck. Or rather, the disaster they'd anticipated. On May 1, 1940, the Germans changed their key exchange protocol. They stopped repeating the message key. The number of successful Enigma decipherments dropped dramatically. The information blackout lasted until August 8th, when the new bombe arrived. This upgraded machine, christened Agnus Dei, or Agnes for short, fulfilled all of Turing's expectations. Within 18 months, 15 more bombes were in operation, each one clattering like a million knitting needles. If everything went well, a Bombe might find an Enigma key within an hour. Once they'd established the settings for one message, they could deduce the day key and decipher all other messages sent that same day. A colleague later said of Turing, "With very intelligent people, you talk to them, they come out with an idea, and you say to yourself, if not to them, I could have had that idea." You never had this feeling with Turing at all. He constantly surprised you with the originality of his thinking. He was marvelous. But even as the bombes were beginning to unlock Luftwaffe communications, a more deadly threat lurked beneath the Atlantic waves. The German Navy used a different, more sophisticated version of Enigma for their U-boat communications, and Turing set himself the challenge of breaking into it. In an attic room at Bletchley Park, with nothing but scrambled letters to work with, Turing began unraveling the secrets of the U-boat messages. What he discovered was extraordinary. Unlike the Luftwaffe, the German Navy was taking no chances. Instead of letting operators choose 3 letters at random for their message settings, they had to get them from a book. With practically no information to go on, Turing identified how Navy operators selected their keys from a daily list. He correctly guessed that to hide these keys, the letters were encoded using secret tables called bigram tables. Instead of substituting single letters, these tables substituted pairs of letters. Turing worked all this out from pure analysis and got it absolutely right, but knowing the system existed wasn't enough. To actually crack the naval Enigma, they needed those secret bigram tables. These codes were printed on rose paper and ink that would immediately dissolve if it got wet. The German sailors had orders to throw the material overboard or soak it in water if capture seemed imminent. How do you capture something specifically designed to be destroyed before you can get your hands on it? Then came an amazing stroke of luck, though luck might not be the right word for what happened to the men involved. Captain Fritz Julius Lemp was a hero of the Third Reich. His U-boat, the U-110, had sunk the first ship of the war. In May 1941, he set out on what would be his last mission. 20-year-old Sub-Lieutenant David Bombe was aboard HMS Bulldog on escort duty guarding 50 ships in convoy OB-318 from Liverpool, bound for America. South of Iceland, they knew they were being shadowed. "You get reports back from the Admiralty. You're being shadowed by U-boats," Bombe recalled. "We always knew we'd be attacked in this area." Suddenly, 2 ships were torpedoed, one after another. A corvette, the Obridia, made an accurate attack on the U-boat with depth charges. The explosions must have been devastating. The U-110 was forced to surface. What happened next changed the war. The British were able to board the damaged U-boat before it sank. Inside, they found exactly what Turing needed. The bigram tables, the daily keys, the whole cryptographic treasure trove. These materials, rushed back to Bletchley Park, gave Turing the final piece of the puzzle. With the bigram tables in hand and his understanding of the naval Enigma system, Turing could now deploy his methods. The U-boat Enigma began yielding its secrets. The impact was immediate and profound. Allied ships could now route around wolf packs. Convoys could be redirected away from U-boat concentrations. The Battle of the Atlantic began to turn. By 1943, an engineering team influenced by Turing's work had completed what is arguably the first true computer, the Colossus. It enabled the Allies to continue decoding messages from ever more sophisticated versions of Enigma. While the Bombe and Colossus were designed for single tasks and couldn't be reprogrammed, they performed brilliantly. These machines are credited with enabling the Allies to overcome the 3-to-1 advantage the German Luftwaffe enjoyed over the Royal Air Force and win the crucial Battle of Britain. They helped anticipate Nazi tactics throughout the war. Some historians estimate that Turing's work shortened the war by 2 years and saved millions of lives. But here's the remarkable thing. Everything at the Government Code and Cipher School was top secret. Nobody outside Bletchley Park knew about Turing's achievement. His parents had absolutely no idea Alan was even a codebreaker, let alone Britain's foremost cryptanalyst. He'd told his mother once that he was involved in some form of military research, but didn't elaborate. She was merely disappointed it hadn't resulted in a more respectable haircut for her scruffy son. Even though Bletchley was run by the military, they'd conceded they'd have to tolerate the scruffiness and eccentricities of these professor types. And tolerate it they did, though whether they would have tolerated Turing's homosexuality if they'd known remains an open question, one that would have tragic consequences years later. So what is Alan Turing's true legacy? Yes, he helped end World War II. Yes, he saved millions of lives, but his greatest contribution went far beyond the battlefield. With a single 1936 paper, Turing proved that all computation, every smartphone, every supercomputer, every line of code, rests on one simple idea, a machine capable of following basic rules. From this came the Church-Turing thesis, showing that anything computable by natural law can be computed by such a machine. And then came the shock. Turing also proved there are problems with answers that exist, yet can never be computed. Limits not of technology, but of reality itself. The same man who cracked Enigma also revealed the boundaries of intelligence, logic, and machines. And much of what he did remained hidden for decades. But here's the question that still haunts us today. If some truths can never be computed, what does that mean for artificial intelligence, and for us? To dive deeper into Turing's life, his secrets, and the ideas that shaped our digital world, download the Skoob app now and unlock the full story.